people.
Sure.
It's back. Okay. Okay, good. Well, apparently we're back on. So sorry about this, everyone. We've had some issues with Comcast recently as well. We had to upgrade our cable, our internet service, and they didn't upgrade it, and it's been a bit of a palaver. But fingers crossed, we're back. So I like Ancient Aliens for the same reason you do. It gets people interested. And one of the things I was fascinated with when I was a kid was the whole thing about Atlantis.
Yes.
And there's a great book series that somehow ties Atlantis together with King Arthur, which were like two of my favorite things when I was in high school. And it's like, it's impossible, and it's fairy tales and it's fiction, but it's interesting and engaging, and it gets people kind of into this field of study. I've heard a lot of different arguments as to why alien theories are problematic and challenging, kind of ethically speaking. Do you have any thoughts on it? So I should rephrase that. A lot of the things that I have problems with is the most prevalent alien theories seem to be based around the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Mayans, like non-white, non-Western European groups of people,
Yes.
Which I have a problem with as kind of inherently racist. We as white European, white Americans, we can't conceive of how we ourselves would build these magnificent structures. So how on earth is it that these primitive, non-white people could have done something so fantastic? They couldn't, so it must have been the aliens.
Yes. This is an issue that I think is really important to discuss. In essence, the question is Ancient Aliens racist?
Yeah.
And it's one that I think it touches a lot of nerves in fans of the show. And I think, truthfully, most people who are interested in the show are not interested in it because they have particular issues about race. For them, they look at this is an issue of technology.
Mm-hmm.
Could people have built these monuments? Do these pieces of art actually depict aliens or not? And so I think it turns a lot of people off when you say, oh, it's racist. And people, I think, understand it. Viewers of the show, people who like the show, understandably get upset and say, well, this isn't racist. Yeah. There's a picture of a UFO on this wall. That's not about race. And there's a sense in that that's true. That most of the show today is not explicitly crafted, I don't think, to be racist. But there is a deep-seated underbelly here, which is really scary. And if you dig into the ancient alien literature that has been published that predates the show, a lot of the things they cite, and then the books that those books cite, and if you travel the citation route of who came up with these ideas to begin with, a lot of this goes back to the colonial era. And so much of what Ancient Aliens does is they look at monuments, they look at art and say, the local people could not have built that. It must be aliens. That same statement has been going on for centuries because during the height of the colonial era, there are so many examples where European colonialists looked at native monuments and native cities and sites and said, natives couldn't have built that. It must have been a mythical white race. And so there's a plethora of these stories about Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe was supposed to be built by a mythical white race. There are all kinds of claims in my own part when I work in Mexico. There's lots of claims that the Toltec, the Aztec tell us all about the Toltec, how wonderful the Toltec were, these people that came before them, how the Toltec were white. There's all these claims that the Aztec don't say it, but all the Europeans coming along later say, oh, the Toltec must have been white. There are these other claims, there are claims that the Aztecs saw Cortez as the returning god Quetzalcoatl, and that there are these alleged stories that Quetzalcoatl was white and bearded and all of these things. And so there's this claim that the people of the Americas are familiar with white people. That all of that develops post-contact. All of that comes out and develops after the fact. And it's all coming from European sources. It does not come from the indigenous sources. Mm-hmm. And so those colonial claims that Native people could not have built these sites, could not have built these structures, are repeated over and over in the literature, and they develop into this sort of weird scientific-y, pseudoscience sounding literature in the 19th century, where we have a lot of people making big, grandiose scientific statements about the Toltec or Great Zimbabwe being built by a white race. And that's the literature that our original Ancient Alien authors cite. And again, I'm not sure the Ancient Alien authors cited it because they were intending to be racist, but in essence, you have an entire theory that is built on racist foundations, and that is extraordinarily problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only problematic, and I think the counter that would come from a believer or a viewer of the show who likes it, like, well, so what if it's true? If these monuments actually depict aliens, then does it really matter if this is necessarily tied to these older periods? And so I think it's one of these problematic issues. There's a little aside I can't skip entirely, because Eric von Daniken, who is not the originator of ancient astronaut claims, but certainly the popularizer thereof, and the show Ancient Aliens was founded in honor of von Daniken. If you look at some of von Daniken's books in the 70s, he wrote some extraordinarily racist things in some of those books. Things about, the aliens had a chosen race that was the white race, that black race was inferior, that there's a line about, like, well, you've never seen a white monkey. He says some incredibly horrific things in some of his works in the 70s that he doesn't say anymore, and they're very problematic, but they're isolated to a certain extent.
Okay, interesting. Do you receive a lot of kickback from people who are fans of the show and who do enjoy these theories when you try and talk to them in terms of archaeological process? And I promise we're not all part of a massive conspiracy theory, and this is the actual truth as the science that is archaeology can show you.
I do get a lot of kickback, and I like having discussions. For those of you tuning in, you can always find me on Twitter at DSA Archaeology. And I have Ask Me Anything in my little Twitter bio for a reason. I think that these issues, these claims like Ancient Aliens, thrive in silence. If the Academy doesn't talk about these things, I think that they grow. In essence, I don't think there's a problem that is solved by ignoring it. And I do get a lot of kickback. And I've had some fun interactions where I think people have, we've had some interesting backs and forth. Once somebody starts accusing me of being a part of the conspiracy and the cover-up, I'm just kind of done at that point, because if you think I'm covering things up,
there's nothing you can say at that point.
But I try to talk about evidence, and I think this is where we have our biggest problems, is that in archaeology, we are very tied to an issue of collecting evidence, making observations, documenting those observations, and drawing interpretations from them. And what's so important in archaeology is that you do a holistic approach. You don't get to look at one monument. You don't get to look at one building.
Yeah.
You need to look at everything. You need to look at the 10,000 pieces of broken pottery that came out of that site. You need to look at all of the stone tools that came out of that site. You need to look at the house foundations at that site. There is such a wealth of data in archaeology that allows us to build up our interpretations that looking at one piece of art or looking at one object in isolation cannot really match in the same way. So this is something I try to communicate as best I can. It's the challenge, I think, of public archaeology and communicating archaeology. If I'm going to give an hour talk about the Maya, I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you about all of the pottery shards that I analyzed for my dissertation or my work. I'm just going to tell you, you know what, that pottery says it's Middle Preclassic, and I'm going to move on. But there's a whole lot of work in the background that we don't necessarily front. And so I think that's the problem. That a lot of viewers say, well, the ancient alien theorists say it means this, and the archaeologists say it means this. and they see that there's an equal amount of information or interpretation going on there, whereas try to argue there's a lot of data you're not seeing on the archaeological side. The ancient alien folks, they're showing you everything they've got because they've got very, very little. We've got so much data, we can't show it all to you, or you will go to sleep really quickly. Because as I love archaeology, I love it to tears, but it took me a month to do the pottery analysis, or just the data collection of the pottery analysis for my dissertation research. I published an article on the pottery at Stobo. If you want it, I will send it to you. Please read it. It's really not of much interest, though, to anyone but someone who wants to work on pre-classic Maya pottery.
Yeah.
And so there's this issue where we have so much data that isn't necessarily entertaining data, it isn't necessarily exciting data, but it is foundational to building up and drawing interpretations of what really happened in the past. And so this is something I try to draw out as much as I can.
Excellent. So I'm working on Mesopotamian royal inscriptions, and one of the reasons I'm doing the work I'm doing is because so often these inscriptions are completely taken out of context. They're studied just as text, which is very important work. But you have to try and go back and look at the context they were found in, and look and see that actually they were found. It may have been found on a clay pot in a room with 800 other clay pots, and actually that tells us something very specific, and you need to have that knowledge before you start drawing any conclusions. And I find it's quite difficult sometimes, even just to find all of the data about where something was found, what it was found with, what condition it was in when it was found. It's difficult enough for me to trawl through, and I'm a PhD student and I've been trained in where to go, what to look for, and how to do this kind of research. So I imagine for a layperson who has just a passing interest in this, or it's their hobby, it must be near impossible to get hold of this information because it's published in esoteric journals. The excavation reports are very expensive, and in academic libraries, they're not like in your local public library. And one of the ways that at least our field seems to be starting to combat this is by trying to digitize as much as they can. And I did a video on it, I think last week. There's something called the Online project, which is a digitization of either everything or very close to everything that Leonard Woolley pulled out of the ground at Ore.
Fantastic.
It's really cool, and it's wading through 8 million pieces of pottery to find the context for the two things that you're interested in. But it's fascinating. I think it's a really good use of web space, and it's free to the public, which is another thing that I'm quite passionate about. Trying to make as much research as you possibly can freely available. So it's one of the things that I like about the internet, and I'm quite excited for. But I know that one of the problems as well that Mesopotamian archaeologists encounter is just such a backlog of materials. You go out and you excavate for a season, you have so many seasons in the field, and then either you can't go back or you decide, well, I've got like 3 shipping containers full of stuff, I should probably catalogue and publish everything. But it's been maybe 10 years since you excavated some of the things that you're publishing. And just going through that and getting it out is a massive challenge. And it occurs to me as we're speaking that is possibly one of the reasons why this whole the archaeologists are hiding the truth theory gains so much traction.
And I had a back and forth with some colleagues online the other day about this, and I think it's an important issue. Our field of archaeology is not above critique.
Oh, no.
There are real problems in our field, and this backlog of publication is one of them. Gray literature is one of them. Gray literature for us, in essence, are archaeological site reports, things that are written and shared amongst our colleagues and might be on file at an institution. But unless you really know the archaeologist or know the institution, that literature is not really published. It's very hard to get your hands on. And so there's a lot of problems that we as a discipline have. And that is absolutely true. And I think there's an important distinction to draw between sort of publishing backlogs and conspiracy.
Yeah.
We need to be more transparent. We need to be more open. I'd love to see more open access publishing. It's the economic backbone or problems with that. I'm not really qualified to understand. Yeah. I can write things and put them up on my blog, but that doesn't necessarily. There's a value to peer review.
There really is. Yeah.
And so if you're going to do peer review, you're going to have to deal. It's going to be slower. Mm-hmm. And so these are important things to critique archaeology for. And I would never say otherwise. We do not know everything that happened in the past, and we have not. It's not that we've never made mistakes as a discipline before, but that is very different from sort of a conspiracy of silence.
Yes. No, agreed. And I think it's for people who don't have any understanding of how archaeology as a field works and how museums work, it's worth saying at this point that one of the problems that I think is currently being encountered is that museums and libraries do run out of room, ultimately. Uh-huh. And yes. They can't house records indefinitely. And if you have a small, seemingly unimportant site that was excavated in the mid-1920s, and you only have so much funding, and you have to choose between digitizing the reports from this site, funding maybe a more publicly accessible initiative, and maybe just disposing of the old site reports because you simply don't have the room to keep them.
Yeah.
It's not a terribly difficult decision to make. I mean, the museums and humanities enterprises generally don't have a lot in the way of money. So if you have a choice between something that's going to make you money and keep the museum open, keep your research funded, and paying some graduate student to sit and scan 800 site reports, you're not really going to go with the site reports because it's not going to bring anything in. So it's a very difficult thing, and you're right. We do have a standard that we need to maybe lift up slightly, but it's not that we have evidence for aliens, people, and we're trying really hard not to show you. I promise. I have yet, as a PhD graduate student, I have yet to see anything that convinces me that there may be aliens that built anything in human history.
The cover-up notion I always find a bit interesting. With ancient aliens in particular, maybe it's a little more plausible, but a lot of folks are making things like Atlantis arguments out there, or this more generalized, there was a lost civilization 10,000 years ago that carved the Sphinx, which, no.
I've seen that. There's just no, we know where the Sphinx came from.
The general gist is that I, as an archaeologist, if I believed there was evidence for a civilization 10,000 years ago, I will publish it. I will publish it today. I will run it out and I will scream about it because that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And if I could prove all of my colleagues wrong, that wouldn't damage my career. That would help my career.
It's career-making stuff. If you can go to a journal and say, look, here is irrefutable evidence that aliens built the pyramids. Here is like a signed receipt by one of the pharaohs saying the people from the sky who were here, look, here's a statue of them, came, they built it, we had nothing to do with it, they used some kind of weird light technology. Like, who wouldn't publish that?
Instead, we have an actual journal from an actual person who helped transport the blocks down the Nile River to the site of Giza.
Yeah.
We actually have the guy's journal who says, what it's like to move these blocks and what it's like to take them and be part of this great endeavor. The data is there. The data, it's, the pyramids at Giza is always so funny because people come back again and again. They couldn't possibly have built that.
They couldn't. They really couldn't. Well,
we have written records saying they were building it. We have iconographic records showing that is art, showing people dragging statues and blocks. We have archaeological records. Mark Lehner excavated the workmen's village, Heitel Garab. He spent years excavating the actual village at Giza where all the workers lived. We have their living quarters. There's sort of a a doctor, a hospital, if you will, where they help them recover from broken injuries. We even have, I love it, there's little hieroglyphs talking about the names of different work crews. My favorite one, there's a label for one of the worker groups. They're the drunkards of Menkaure. We love our pharaoh so much, we're going to get drunk and drag blocks for him. We actually have oodles of evidence suggesting that the pyramids were built by humans using the relatively basic technology that we know. That doesn't mean there aren't sort of little gaps. We don't have an actual photograph or a video of these people dragging these blocks. There are going to be debates forever about what the mud brick ramps might have looked like that they used to drag these blocks up higher. There will always be some questions that we don't quite have the answer to. But we have a lot of data that all correlates with one another and suggests I guess this is our problem, the normal blasé, these dudes drag the blocks up the pyramid and then, that's nowhere near as exciting. Wait, let me get my hair. It's nowhere near as exciting. It's like, we don't know. Therefore, aliens. It's not as fun. It doesn't make as good TV. But we have the data, and I think that data and that basic truth matter.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think one of the things that I find difficult is that to me, like, the lives of ordinary people living thousands and thousands of years ago are genuinely fascinating. Like, if you can read this guy's journal and find out what his daily life was like, how he felt about dragging these massive blocks down the river, it's really interesting. And it's much more interesting to me than, this long convoluted alien theory that sounds very flashy but doesn't really tell me a lot because it's not true, versus sitting down and reading a book that says this is how people actually lived, this is what they were concerned with, this is how they had families and what their children did, and it's interesting.
One of my favorite archaeological projects that I've been involved in when we were working in northwest Yucatan with these pre-classic Maya materials, we found over 20 examples of ball court architecture. So the Maya used to play a hip ball game with a rubber ball. Rubber's a New World plant. That's one of the fun things I love when you get to the Spanish showing up in Mexico. They'd never seen a rubber ball before. They'd never seen a ball that bounced like that before. So there's some neat descriptions of how exciting that was. But we know the Maya, the Aztec, and many people in Mesoamerica played this sort of hip ball game with these rubber balls. And so much of what we've known about that game for decades has been about elites playing it. Mm-hmm. And this project that we found more than 20 examples of these ball courts at very small sites that would have been home to 50, 100 people.
Probably not elite sites then.
Really upended sort of our traditional interpretation of this as an elite endeavor or an elite game, having these at such small little villages. But it was this moment where it's like, they're playing sport.
Yeah.
And my interpretation of these ball courts at this point in time is that, we're talking about community building enterprises. How do you bond together with your community? You play a game together, you have a contest together, and that is the most beautiful, perfect thing to come in here right now.
See, isn't he better than aliens? Hey, baby. Sorry. 1 second. Hi. Hi. Someone's growing, so he needs feeding every 35 minutes.
Yes, we have an 8-month-old upstairs.
As well, you know.
Right now.
He also doesn't like it very much when I laugh.
Oh no, that's what I've learned. You are not allowed to talk right now. No.
I sneezed earlier, and you'd have thought that I hit him with something. He just screamed. I was like, I'm so sorry. Oh dear, no, Mummy's talking too much. So I'm going to stop talking and let you talk some more while he has his fill.
Let's see. Now I'm all of a sudden on the spot. What am I supposed to be talking about in general? Let's talk about actually one of the interesting things about ancient alien theories, and Giorgio Tsoukalos, who is one of the primary voices on the show, is the the gentleman with the hair. Tsoukalos just gave a speech earlier. It was today or yesterday at Contact in the Desert, which is a big conference that Ancient Aliens has, that History puts on for the whole show to let fans come and meet the stars. And I've not seen the transcripts of his talk yet, or all the details, but I saw a journalist article about what he was talking about. And I think it's an important topic for Ancient Aliens in general. His talk today, in essence, he was talking about how religious events in the past were misinterpreted alien sightings. And this is something that has been with Ancient Aliens at least since Von Däniken. We could certainly probably push it a little bit earlier in some ways too. The general notion that these are the gods from the skies, right? And Von Däniken pushed, and the show has pushed for a while, this notion that religious monuments, even religious stories, anything that talks about anyone coming from the sky is an alien.
Yep.
And it's a very interesting issue where there's a hyper-realism to this, and this is what I gather from the article from the journalist who saw Tsoukalos speak today or yesterday, that Tsoukalos was pushing this notion that there is no imagination, there is no religion, there is only alien. And so anything coming from the sky could not possibly be someone fantasizing, someone being tricked by something they saw, or someone having an honest-to-goodness religious experience. It must be this hyper-realistic and materialistic alien that lands and is misinterpreted. Mm-hmm. And I always found this to be sort of one of the more interesting angles to the ancient alien bent, because it's not archaeological. So in some ways, as an archaeologist, there's only so much I can say about this. There's no, but it's a dim view of humanity, I feel like, where it takes away all imagination, it takes away all religion, it takes away all inspiration, and says, nope, that's a misinterpreted alien.
Aliens.
That makes me sad, I think, more than anything. It just makes me sad that it is a dim view of human capability.
That's something that, I'm sure some people know, I've been rage tweeting about it recently. I've been reading Zecharia Sitchin's 12th Planet. I have like half a chapter to go and I just can't bring myself to go back to it. But that's exactly the argument he uses. All of the mythology is not actually myth. It's factual occurrences of aliens coming to Earth and falling out and trying to kill each other, and I just read it and think to myself, you must have such a dim view of human creativity that everything that does not resemble a human in the art and the literature of these peoples has to be an alien. Like he kind of jumps around chronologically, which frustrates me significantly. So he takes mythology from like the old Babylonian period, which is like mid-second millennium, and then jumps all the way forward to the first millennium and says, oh, it's all the same alien. Really? But he uses
centuries.
Exactly. And see, he gets around this by saying that the aliens just had longer lifespans because their planet their planet is so much further from the sun that 1 year on the planet Nibiru is like 4 million years in Earth years. So naturally their physiology is such that they can live for like 80 of their own years, but that ends up being the entire history of human evolution. I'm like, well, I mean, that's a creative suggestion. Probably not true, but very creative. But he looks at these depictions of guardian spirits that are like human from the neck down, but have like an eagle's head. And instead of saying, and they're beautifully rendered, the Neo-Assyrian palace reliefs are absolutely stunning. They're so detailed. And he says, well, this is clearly an alien with a spacesuit. The eagle head isn't supposed to be like some kind of human eagle hybrid that signifies divine protection or even a demon. It's a person, an alien person who would have had a human-shaped head underneath, wearing some kind of spacesuit, which is laughable and kind of sad. That's the conclusion you go to, rather than these people, these so many different cultures just had that really rich imagination and rich tradition that they engaged with.
Well, and I think it's important to mention here too that there's a lot of creative translation going on in these interpretations.
Yep.
The Sitchin certainly walked in knowing what he wanted these texts to say. And this is certainly true with a lot of other ancient alien interpretations of texts. They're looking for the aliens. And so there are some... Translation is tough. And I think that's one of the hardest things to get across sometimes to people who don't work in multiple languages, is that translating from one language to another, go play with Google Translate. Actually, this is a bit of my nerd side, but I love... there's a Twitter account that takes Magic the Gathering cards and just runs them through Google Translate a couple of times and sees the laughable, strange text that comes on these cards after you do that. Translating from one language to another is tough. It's even harder when we're talking about an ancient language that is less well known and less well documented. Yep. And it's hard. Remember when you're in high school and you had to read Shakespeare? That was hard because the English has shifted over 500 years.
And because the culture is so different. So if a joke is made in Shakespearean English, it was hilarious to Shakespeare's audience, it has to be explained to modern English American high schoolers so they actually get the joke. So taking a text and translating it in inverted commas out of context, you lose 90% of what it's actually saying, which leaves the other 10% very open to creative interpretation.
Yes, and I've seen several very creative uses of this. My favorite text actually really is, so one of the core tenets in Ancient Aliens lore is that there are the Vimanas, the flying ships that are supposed to be described in the ancient Vedic texts. And there are some possible descriptions of some flying things in the ancient Vedic texts, as, again, lots of people have imagined the notion of flight before, the Renaissance in Europe. But the TV show has done this, Von Däniken did this, a lot of them pull from a very particular text called the Vimana Shakastra. I might get that pronunciation slightly wrong here. But this text, and it has been claimed specifically on the TV show, it was claimed that this text was an ancient Vedic text. And this is one of the times the show has been quite dishonest. Because that text was produced in the early 1900s. And it was produced by psychic dictation. Good. And this is not me trying to slur the text. That's what it says in the text. They're saying we are channeling this information through psychic sources. And the Vimana Shakastra, this is the text that describes tremendous flying machines and whirling pools of mercury and all of these things. It is the most frequently cited Vedic text by ancient alien folks, claiming that that ancient people in India saw flying machines. Now, this one, for me, if it's produced by psychic dictation, I don't share the faith that that's a real source. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of people, and this is where some of my work definitely overlaps with religion, and that's where some of my work can be a little bit challenging, and we have to talk carefully about what our sources of information are. To me, a psychic dictated text is not a valid text. For others, it is. But I think it's fundamentally dishonest for the show not to say this is, because they call it an ancient Vedic text rather than a 20th century text, which is what it really is. Yeah. Even if you believe in psychic dictation, you should be proud of that in some sense and not try to hide it away and shove it away.
Exactly.
So for those people who really love the Vimanas, the 99% of what they tell you on the show about the Vimanas comes from this text and not the actual ancient Vedic texts.
Oh dear. Okay, so I am going to say now, if anyone has some questions for Dr. Anderson, we have about 10 minutes before he's going to head back into his life. So if you have questions, now is the time to start getting them into us, and we will try and answer them. And in the meantime,
it's frozen.
It's frozen.
But I'm asking. I've been chatting with people. So I just asked them.
So Josh is going to ask questions. We will answer them, and then I'll just upload the recording that I'm taking now onto the internet when we are done. So, yes, I have to say, Zachariah Sitchin has been a revelation. I was.
Interesting read.
The thing is, I spoke to a couple of people before I started reading it, and they said, Megan, it's laughably incorrect, but it's like you read it like you would a good science fiction novel.
Hey, Gerard is asking if you guys have any new insights that he can use to debate those weirdos.
Those weirdos. Okay. So someone has asked if we have any new insights that he can use to debate those weirdos, which I suspect he means ancient alien fanatics. Or, sorry, ancient alien believers. Let's go. Believers is nicer than fanatics.
I think one of the points of data we've danced around here a little bit is context and chronology. And you mentioned it with some of the texts recently. Typically, the claims that will be made can be separated by hundreds, if not thousands of years sometimes. And I think that, to me, is a problem. And this is a general problem in pseudo-archaeology that people will ignore chronology altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we say there is a similarity between the art of ancient Mesopotamia, and let's imagine, because it's certainly been alleged, that there are similarities between the art of ancient Mesopotamia and places like Mexico and Peru, the buildings that we're talking about there, most classic Maya buildings, and most of the architecture we're talking about in Peru at this point are from somewhere between 900 AD, thousands of years after those buildings that were built in Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
That's a really, really long gap for any kind of continuity to be going on. And so that, to me, stretches a lot of the going on here is that, in essence, if we take sort of all the claims that have been made on the show and von Daniken's books and elsewhere and Sitchin's books, the alien contact didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice, it didn't happen 3 times, it happened again and
continual,
again of years, and not just at one place on the planet, but all over our planet. If we take all the things that they've claimed to prove alien contact, that alien contact was ongoing from at least 3000 BC to at least 1500 AD, never stopped, and happened all around the globe. That is massive. And if that massive level of contact, all you've got are a handful of pictures that look kind of like aliens to you, to me, that is really weak in comparison for that great breadth of time and space.
And why are they not here now? If they've been around for that long and they were instrumental in forming so many human civilizations, like, where are they today? Why?
They'll be back in 2900.
Oh, they'll be back in 2900? Okay. Josh says we just have to wait until 2900.
There's an interesting, this is sort of a meta claim, and I'm not sure I can prove this per se, but a student of mine made an interesting observation once, because certainly there are still people who say that they see UFOs today, but UFO sightings and claims of abductions and whatnot aren't as common as they used to be decades ago. And my student's observation was, everybody's got a camera in their hand right now, and yet we still have the best thing we have for modern UFOs are still blurry pictures and blurry videos, and we have not seen a single good high-res image. And so my student suggested Ancient Aliens is becoming more and more popular now because we skip the camera problem all of a sudden. We don't have to worry about why can't you get a good picture of them today because they're not here anymore. We're talking about thousands of years ago when there were no cameras.
Do we? Oh, another question?
So mentioned peer review earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody was asking for clarification. So Ancient Aliens is not peer reviewed?
I see. So I don't know if you heard that. Someone asked whether Ancient Aliens is peer reviewed or not, and my hunch is no, but I do not know this for a fact.
So in the official context of academic journals, no. So in an academic journal, just to describe real quickly for everybody, and usually what happens is you submit an article, and it will be read by 3 of your peers anonymously, 3 people who have similar training and education and experience to you, and theoretically are also knowledgeable of the particular issues that you are talking about. So the ball court materials that I have published on has gone through peer review and was read by people who also work on ball courts. And so that process is part of what helps us get good research out there. I've written things that I think are brilliant but didn't get past peer review, and so I guess I was wrong. But to the best of my knowledge, there are no ancient alien claims that have survived peer review. They go to non-academic publishing sources, or they go to self-publishing options where they don't have to meet that kind of standard. Mm-hmm. Popular publishers, popular presses, non-academic presses, their primary interest is just if it will sell. And this is a general problem with picking up any book in a bookstore. If you're picking up a nonfiction book that is not published by an academic press, the vetting that it went through was just, would it sell? And I don't mean to make that a horrible statement on capitalism, but it's just the truth. Mm-hmm. A publishing house will only stay in business if they print books that people want to buy and read. And so that's primarily what a publishing house cares about, whether people will buy it. They don't primarily care about whether it's accurate or not.
Mm-hmm. And in the same vein, I strongly suspect that the History Channel is less interested with whether Ancient Aliens is accurate and peer-reviewed, and more interested with how many people will tune in this week to watch the claims that are being made.
The History Channel as a corporate entity seems pretty uninterested in any of the critiques that have been leveled against the show.
Which are many and varied, I'm sure. Well, we have about 5 minutes, so I think I will wrap things up with Dr. Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would be amenable to coming back on, maybe we'll do a non-live broadcast to try and streamline some of these issues, and then I can upload it later. But maybe you said you were away for much of the summer, so when you get back, we'll see if people have more questions that they would like answered, and we will call you again. There we go. Sorry. But thank you
so much
very much. Oh no, it was fascinating. Thank you. Bye.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Hope to talk to you guys again soon.
You will. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, and everybody's still watching. Let me just close that. Whoop. Ha! I did it. Hooray. I'm so sorry about the streaming quality. Yeah, I'm going to blame Comcast here. I don't know if it's their fault, but I'm going to say it is. And because they're not here to defend themselves, I can do that. So there. So in the 3 minutes we have left, because I really should put this child back to bed, I'm going to give a very quick rundown of what we have coming up. So on Saturday, that's not right. On Saturday, we were going to do another live stream, but given the challenges we've had with this one, I'm not sure we'll make it. I'll try and work out what went wrong and see if it's something we can fix. But either way, on Saturday, there will be another interview update from us. We will be talking to Louise Loges, who is a journalist investigating antiquities trafficking. She's also just started her PhD in Assyriology, so she's one of us. Yay! We will take over the world one day. Specifically, we'll be talking to her about the Hobby Lobby federal case, in case you didn't see that in the news. The owners of Hobby Lobby smuggled in 5,500 stolen artifacts, my notes are telling me, from Iraq for their Museum of the Bible in DC. and were subject to a federal investigation and then fined $3 million and made to give the artifacts back to the people of Iraq. So we'll be talking to her about antiquities trafficking, the problems with buying stolen goods, I mean, apart from the obvious that it's horribly unethical, and like her take on the Hobby Lobby case. This coming Tuesday, I think we will be on the Non Sequitur show to talk with Kyle and Steve about Zachariah Sitchin and his fascinating theories on Mesopotamia and the Nibiru. Here's a hint, I think they're crazy. But for more details on that, tune in on Tuesday. And then on the 16th of June at 3 p.m, we will be hosting a live Sumerian discussion. When I say discussion, it's going to be more like a class with Josh on Google Hangout. He'll be going over the Sumerian exercises that he put up in the first Sumerian grammar video. I think it's called Learn to Read Sumerian, lesson 1 maybe. So if you're interested in that, please leave a comment or email us at digitalhammurabi@gmail.com so we can include you on that. And then tentatively on the 30th of June, we have a Sitchin discussion currently penciled into our calendars with Kyle Curtis and a friend of ours, Avery Taylor. Again, I need to check this date with them, but it's the first one that Josh and I can do. So Avery is a friend of ours from Johns Hopkins. She's currently getting her PhD in Mesopotamian art history. She also has a degree in astrophysics, so she's a pretty good person to talk with about Sitchin and the planet Nibiru. I think that's actually it for us. So thank you all for tuning in. I'm, again, so sorry about the streaming problems we've had. I'm staring at myself on my screen and realizing that even with adjusting my vocal whatsits, I'm still like 4 seconds out from my lips moving. So I really appreciate your patience. Thank you, Josh, for being in the comments and telling people that we're so sorry. And yeah, I really hope that next time this works a bit better. So have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.